Everybody, my name is Nick Marshall, and I'm the manager of exhibitions and programs at George Eastman Museum. Thank you for joining us for today's Focus 45 talk with Erin Fisher, collections manager in our technology department. Before we get started, I'd like to thank NEH CARES for their support of this program and many of the other programs that we've been able to provide through Zoom over the course of the year. Their support has been very helpful and has enabled us to do many of the things that we're doing now. I'd also like to thank our members for their amazing support throughout this year in particular. If you are interested in supporting the museum and our online programming, I urge you to consider becoming a member or helping to contribute to our annual fund if you have the means. We love to be able to provide meaningful and insightful presentations and conversations like today's, and all of the support we can get is immensely helpful. Most people associate our technology collection with the amazing cameras we have in our vaults, excuse me, and on display in our galleries. But today, Erin's going to dive into some of the lesser known objects, but equally important to communicating the history of the technologies related to photography. If you have questions for Erin, please feel free to submit them at any point through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. We will go over as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. The chat function is open as well if you'd like to say hello or let us know where you're tuning in from. But we do ask that you use the Q&A button to submit your questions. We are recording today's talk, which will be posted on the museum's YouTube account within the next week. Please feel free to revisit or share it with others once it's posted. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Erin Fisher.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Fisher, and like Nick said, I am the collections manager of the technology collection at the George Eastman Museum. And the technology collection has over 17,000 objects, and they're not just cameras. The photographs and cameras are super fascinating, but my interest is in all of the other stuff that's in between, and just looking at how these things work. The manufacturing history that shapes the evolution of photography and technology. So I really wanted to bring more awareness to some of these rare objects in the collection. And I only have 45 minutes and there's tons of objects to choose from. So hopefully we can create some content in the future so I have an opportunity to share more with you. We're going to do a quick poll at the end. So please give us feedback and let us know what you might want to hear more about. Really wanting to engage digitally with everyone, especially with the pandemic and these strange times. So I've broken up the talk into 3 sections that involve important tools of the trade for making an image. So I'm focusing more on earlier tools of the trade, so more 1880s, 1900s, early 1900s. So I'm going to be looking at our exposure meter collection, some plates and film, as well as my personal favorite topic, paper. So let's get started. So exposure meters. So the technology collection has an extensive amount of exposure meters. And I'm going to explain some of these objects, and they can get a little bit complicated scientifically. I could probably do an entire talk on light and exposure meters, but I'll do my best to break everything down so that it's not too complicated for everyone so we can all understand. But before I go over these objects, it's important for me to explain just a few things. The sensitivity to light on photographic film is measured on many different numerical scales and historical systems. Today, the scale that we're most used that we see is ISO or ASA. And film speed refers to the speed at which the film or sensitized material reacts to light. And so you can kind of see that on some of these boxes here, and I've highlighted some of these ways in which these numerical scales were represented. And so there was this evolution of the ISO system. So if we look at these film and plate boxes throughout history and in different parts of the world, we're going to see all of these different numbers. And I have like a rough timeline here. This is not the full extent to the representations that were available, but I just wanted to give everyone an idea so that we know that we were not always using ISO. I'm not going to explain all of this today again, but it's just important to note this evolution. And I'll be talking about some of the more earlier things right about here. And the types of exposure meters that I'm going to be talking about are tables and graphs, early sensitometers, actinometers, and extinction meters. So I'm going to start. So upon the arrival of commercially available dry plates or gelatin dry plates in the 1870s, there was a lot of variation in the preparation of gelatin dry plates. Even when pre-prepared plates were made available commercially, there was no accurate measurement for the speed of the plate. They were usually sold as fast, extra fast, rapid, super rapid, or something along those lines. There was a lot of guessing and checking and sometimes wasted plates. So the Wernicke standard was invented by a man named Leon Wernicke. He was of Polish descent. He was very interested in the science of photography, and he experimented with various chemicals and light sensitivity, and he also dabbled in some camera designs as well. And in 1880, his sensitometer was marketed in England, where it was approved as a standard and still used until the end of around 1890. This article here is actually from our collection, and this is a clipping from around 1885. This is a super important object because this was the first practical sensitometer to measure the speed of photographic materials. And when I say sensitometry, that's just meaning the science of measuring the sensitivity of photographic materials. So this is not a light meter. This is a tool to determine how sensitive your plate is. So how does this thing work? So I consulted a lot of different advertisements and manuals, and there's a little bit of information about it, but I also consulted with process historian Nick Brandreth to kind of figure out how this works. So essentially there is a light source, and it's this phosphorescent tablet. And the directions say to ignite a magnesium ribbon by holding it near this tablet surface. Once 1 inch of the magnesium ribbon is burned, that should be enough to excite this tablet and make it glow. The tablet would then be left for exactly 1 minute after the extinction of the magnesium, and the sensitive plate is exposed to the tablet behind the sensitometer for 30 seconds. And it just mentions that the distance between the glass surface and the sensitometer should be around 3/8 of an inch. So you would have your dry plate, you would put it in there behind your sensitometer, then you would have your developed plate afterwards. And the speed of the plate can be gauged by seeing which of the graduated squares is still visible. So this instrument was used enough to have some manufacturers actually label on their plates, like have the Wernicke numbers on their plates. And this is mentioned in some articles. I didn't find a plate that actually had a Wernicke number on it, but I would love to find one, and I'm sure I will. So if anyone has any information or sees a Wernicke number anywhere, please send it my way. I would love to see that. But each number represented 1/3 increase in speed over the previous. So it was basically just used to measure the sensitivity of your plate and saved you some time and money. This is a very rare object, very old, and also really rare to actually have the gelatin plates still intact because they're glass and it's actually a test. So it's really, really special that we have this in our collection. So while this was used, this wasn't super popular, and it was later replaced by another system, Herder and Driftfield. Sorry about that. So Herder and Driftfield. So this meter type is a calculator. So this is in the tables and calculator realm. The first, what we just looked at was a sensitometer. So this is considered a table and calculator. So the actiniograph is one of the earliest exposure calculators and the first to be based on scientific investigation. I actually sat down with Mark Osterman and he helped explain how this worked. The actiniograph was a result of Herder and Driftfield's research into the action of light on sensitive material. The actiniograph was not the reason for Herder and Driftfield's research, more of a byproduct of it. And this was the first scientific investigation into the effect carrying light levels have on the amount of silver deposited on a plate. A little different to what we just looked at with the Wernicke system. The actiniograph was patented in early 1888 and sold by Herder and Driftfield themselves. And then soon after that, the Maran Company sold it in England. This particular model is from 1889. So how it works. So there's a revolving drum with a printed graph of the light levels for different times of day against the times of year, which is where all the research and this kind of curve comes from. There's one fixed plate and then two movable scales, light conditions and aperture. So once you had everything lined up, the result shows an exposure time needed for you. Several manufacturers actually included H and D numbers on their boxes, and you can kind of see that right here, but not until 1892. So prior to this, the user of the actiniograph would have had to find out the plate speed for themselves. And this could be done just by using the actiniograph in reverse. But yeah, this is just a really cool object to have as well. I was actually really excited to see the H and D number on here because then you can kind of digest how this works. So moving on. So this is one of my favorite objects out of all of the exposure meters. And this is an actiniometer, and this is the chronoscope. So what is an actiniometer? An actiniometer is a small test exposure that's made on sensitive paper. The usual arrangement is for the paper to be exposed until its density matches that of the comparison density. Actiniometers became popular during the 1890s and remained so probably up until the 1920s. Chronometer, PAP, just meaning photometer automatique parfait, perfected automatic light meter, which it translates in English. And this was 1912. So it was patented by Paul Bouchier of Paris. And this was very popular in Britain from 1890 to about the 1930s. And this particular object produces a small paper negative of the subject. The front cap pulls off to reveal a plano-convex lens. And at the back of the meter, there's a small holder with a stack of light-sensitive paper. And then you would compare those papers to the standard tints painted on the front of this paper magazine here. And the camera mount is to be screwed on the top. The camera mount could actually screw on the top of a wooden camera. And in a lot of articles you'll read, people would complain because they would leave them on their cameras and lose them. This guy's really tiny, so it fits into this little compact guy here. So, you know, a lot of articles mention that. So sometimes if you have older cameras, I'm assuming in Britain, you could find these little guys attached to cameras. But later, they were popular, but the images were very blurry. People would complain about them from time to time. Most people actually used bee meters. So these are super cute. This is still considered to be an actinometer. And again, actinometers are a small test exposure that's made on sensitive paper. And the paper for this object is inside this little dial. And these were super popular in the early 1900s and even a little bit later, probably up until the 1920s. So how to read this? So you would make an adjustment to set the scale. There was light sensitive paper inside that you could change and replace. So you would turn back the lid to expose this little paper, and you would start counting how many seconds it takes for the paper to darken. Once darkened, to match the two painted tints on the side, depending on how many seconds it took for the paper to darken, you had your exposure. You just needed to make sure that your counting was accurate. And to do that, they actually, you could purchase little chain pendulums, and this would actually measure the seconds for you. I spoke with Martin Scott, who was a previous employee of Kodak, and he actually told me about the pendulum chain, which I actually didn't know about. I was familiar with the meters, but not the pendulum that went with them. And it also came with a little Watkins speed card, just so you could calibrate your exposure. This was super smart because you could purchase many different versions of this. You could purchase the chain. There's lots of different accessories available. So it's very smart, on Watkins' end to, create this, but then you could kind of adapt with it throughout history, or depending on the process that you were using. So another version of a table and graph. This is kind of a hybrid actinometer / table and graph exposure calculator. So these are super beautiful. These are actually the first meters that I found. And I was first attracted to just the beautiful paper samples inside of it. But this was all in French, and unfortunately I do not speak French. But I did a little bit of interpreting via Google Translate. And the directions explain that you actually pull out the middle section where there's a little table to put in a paper sample inside. So you make sure that you have your back to the sun, and then you start to count and pull up the sheet. And you make a series of tests like you would with a darkroom test print. And the shade is obtained after 1 minute of test stripping, and it's compared with those on the photometer, actually below here. And then you would compare that number to the table and you would get your exposure. This meter over here mentions that you can use it with albumin paper. And this one over here mentions that you can use it with gelatin bromide paper. But I would love to, I found little information on both of these meters in our personal collection, but it's a great project for the future. And I'm hoping to look more into this because they're very beautiful, and I really love them. All right, so moving on. So this is the last photometer, or I guess exposure meter, that I want to talk to you guys about today. And this is considered to be an extinction meter. So the light that is judged extension basically means the light that is judged by what is just visible when looking into the meter. And this was introduced in 1888 by J. Ducadron, and this is very early. And again, extinction meters were designed in various ways to vary the brightness of the subject as viewed through the instrument. So while looking through this extension meter, a photographer would manipulate a control that emitted greater or lesser amounts of light. And adjustments would be made when the light became visible through the instrument. So this was actually the very first TTL, or through the lens exposure meter. This meter was designed to be held against a plate camera's ground glass or viewing screen, rather than aimed directly at the subject. So how this works is an exposure table is located on the back of this photometer. So this is the back and this is the front. Notice the letter H in the round window above the exposure table, and then notice the elongated window in this 3 o'clock position. So as you twisted this circular window, you would wait until you could see that this was visible. And then depending on what letter you landed on, you would get your exposure. And these were pretty popular long after its introduction, and even popular up until the end of electric exposure meters, which is super cool. And the cool thing about this particular version that we have here is that we have a lot of different little guys that you could cut depending on what you were using. If you were using a seed dry plate, or you were using, depending on the material that you were using, you could change it out and have a new scale for it. So yeah, this was a really cool find. And again, this is very small, very portable. I would consider using this. This is a very, very cool product. So moving on to plates and films. So we have a crazy amount of plates and films in our collection. We have most of our materials because a lot of stuff was donated to us from Eastman Kodak. And fortunately, Kodak had an amazing research department, and they were always collecting and buying things, obviously not just their products, but competitors' products. So this is why we have such a wide variety of objects in our collection from not only just Kodak, but other manufacturers as well. So I'm gonna get into gelatin dry plates. So gelatin dry plates were the first photographic negative material that was manufactured and mass produced, which is why I'm talking about them. Photography became faster and easier, and the materials also had a shelf life of several months. So this made photography much more accessible, which in turn increased demand for manufactured photographic papers. This really was the beginning of the modern photographic industry. Gelatin dry plate negatives were exclusively used to print all photographic printing processes used between the 1880s and 1890s. And here we have an example of Kramer's extra rapid gelatin dry plates from around 1894. I love this packaging. And as I was explaining before with exposure, here we have kind of an indication of the speed of the plate extra rapid. So George Eastman pretty much dominated the gelatin dry plate field, and he was definitely in the forefront of this era of manufacturing. There were several other companies that preceded his entry into the market. There was lots of American companies, but also European, Lumiere in France, ADFA in Germany, and Ilford in the United Kingdom. And we have examples of all of them, which is fantastic. So just a little bit about, before I dive into some stuff we have in our collection, the gelatin dry plate process is based on the light sensitivity of silver halides, which are suspended in a gelatin binder on a glass support, just in case you weren't familiar with the structure of them. So I'm not going to talk about one specific object. I kind of wanted to emphasize the fact that we have so many different plates, so it's hard to focus on just one. So one thing that I really love to do is I like to see boxes from when the companies first started and then see what companies merged together. So these particular examples, an early box from the MA Seed Company when they were established around 1883. And then later they merged with Eastman Kodak in 1902. And then you can kind of see the Eastman Rochester logo on there. And it's interesting too, because Eastman kept, it looks like they kept the same designs. They just added in, that it was being made by them. And then we see the Stanley Dry Plate Company, which then merged with Eastman Kodak in 1904. So again, this is just a really great example of Eastman really dominating this market. So one thing that you'll find on boxes all the time is the words orthochromatic or panchromatic. So I just kind of wanted to break down what that means. So in 1882, the first orthochromatic plates were available, and these were sensitive to blue and green light. And then in 1906, panchromatic emulsions were introduced, and these were sensitive to all colors of the visible spectrum of light. And you know, as you can see with orthochromatic, it doesn't have that full spectrum, and then we get panchromatic. But when you see film or plates that say that, that's basically what that means. And unfortunately, the use of glass supports for negatives began to decline by around 1890 with the introduction of flexible film, cellulose nitrate. And in 1912, sheet film was introduced, and the late 1920s or early 1930s, sheet film replaced glass plates entirely. And we got Kodak film, which was great for Eastman Company. So these are two objects that I'm so excited about because we have these in our collection, but we have the only known box of Kodak film for use with the number, like the first Kodak. And that's from 1888. And one of the only 3 known boxes of Kodak transparent film, which was introduced in 1889. And roll film really represented the beginning of Eastman Kodak Company's business model. One of the most successful and profitable for much of the 20th century. These 2 boxes are an amazing find and really wonderful to have in our collection. It's not the end. This is not the only film rolls we have, trust me. There's so many, we have so many different rolls and just such a wide variety of materials when it comes to the subject, but these 2 objects are definitely worth mentioning. Another film that is worth mentioning that I find fascinating is the Eastman Autographic film. So this was invented in 1914, and this allowed the photographer to write information directly on the film during exposure. So the text was entered using a little metal stylus, and you would expose this to light for a few seconds, and it would appear in the margin in the processed print. You could also frame it out if you didn't want to see it, so you could make a little note to yourself about the image. And the system was common on early consumer cameras, but became unpopular by the 1920s. And it was later discontinued in the 1930s. But I always really am so fascinated with these. And I was reading through a lot of different advertisements. And all of the advertisements really appealed to, families and capturing memories, but also appealed to, photographers as well. I mean, they would be, you could make notes about your exposure. You could talk about where you were, but it was just really smart on Kodak's end to, have something so sentimental that you could add to your photograph. So that's kind of why the autographic film was fascinating to me, at least. So my personal favorite topic here is paper. So I got interested in paper. I was in graduate school during my master's, doing my master's essay, and I actually worked in the technology collection to do most of my research, and I realized how amazing the technology collection's paper collection was, mostly because of a lot of those donations from Kodak, with their large variety of manufacturing history materials. And I utilized a lot of different resources in the collection. So here, this is actually just a small thing that I wanted to mention. Not only do we have the physical papers themselves, but we have a lot of things that people in the company at Kodak and other manufacturers were using, to design labels. This particular book here was probably, it was someone who worked in probably the design department, making labels, and it's just really cool to have, to be able to see, how these ideas came about. So the first paper that I want to talk about are cyanotypes. So the cyanotype process was not really used often until around like 1880s. And then it kind of became a cheap proofing process for collodion and gelatin dry plates and roll film before the final printing, which final printing you would usually use something more expensive like silver or platinum based photographs. The cyanotype is a simple and stable alternative to albumin, collodion, and gelatin silver. And here we have the ferroprussate paper. This was printed this was made in 1889, I believe. And if you look at this Kodak manual, which is dated 1889, you'll see that this is the paper that was recommended to be used to print your photographs. And just to kind of explain what cyanotype is, so this process, it was really an inexpensive way of producing contact prints. And a contact print simply meaning that you have a negative, a printing frame, and you place that negative directly on the object, letting the light pass through. This involved two stock solutions, so ammonium ferric citrate and potassium ferric cyanide. And this was embedded into the paper. The papers were exposed to ultraviolet light. And then because the cyanotype is a non-silver process, the only fixation required is like a 20-minute bath in running water, which was really convenient, really easy, very affordable for people. So it's no wonder this was something that was recommended in the Eastman Kodak books to use. So after cyanotype, if you look at later manuals, you'll see that the cyanotypes papers were replaced by a different kind of paper called Solio. As you can see this manual here, this is from 1870 or 1897, sorry. And Solio paper, this is a gelatin printing out print. So Solio is a gelatin POP paper. And so this is based on the light sensitivity of silver chloride, which is suspended in a gelatin binder on a Baraya paper support. And printing out papers were contact printed under ultraviolet light, similar to the cyanotype. The print was then washed, gold toned, washed again, placed in a stop bath, and fixed with a sodium thiosulfate solution, washed again and dried. The prints were usually trimmed and mounted, and during the mounting process, prints could be burnished to obtain more of a high gloss finish, which was popular during that time. Later, Solio was actually available in a matte surface to compete with platinum printing. And as you can see here, the image has lots of warm tones, and there were also lots of directions that Kodak sent home with you. As you can see in the middle here, this was a whole manual just on developing and printing at home, which simplified that process. And between 1894 and 1895, Solio paper really dominated the field. It was very, very popular. The Photometers company of Rochester did pose a little bit of a threat with a very similar paper called chloro paper, but Eastman merged with them in 1898. So it wasn't until, I guess, 1898 that the Napura Chemical Company introduced their Vilax paper. This paper was introduced around 1887, but really took off in 1898. The Napura and Eastman both had developing out papers early on, which developing out meaning silver bromide emulsions, which is very similar to like darkroom paper that you would use today. And this required a dark room and careful handling. So these were around, but people weren't really ready for it. And they were used to the slow gelatin POP papers. So sales of DOP papers were kind of declining until a gentleman named Leo Baekeland, also the producer of Bakelite, but I won't get into that. Baekeland created a silver chlorobromide emulsion that could be handled easily in very subdued daylight. And if you can see on the label here, it was 500 times quicker than albumin, meaning it could be rapidly exposed by gaslight, and it would form an image through chemical development. So by 1898, Vilax had gained significant market shares, and other manufacturers rapidly followed by producing their own gaslight papers. And Eastman actually tried to compete with Vilax paper with their own paper called Deco. And this was not very successful, unfortunately. But fortunately, Eastman decided, I'll just purchase the Vilax paper rights. So in 1899, Eastman was really smart and actually purchased this paper. It was immensely popular, especially among amateur photographers. And silver gelatin developing out gaslight papers by 1920 almost completely replaced gelatin printing out papers. And again, I really love looking at these packages here. You see on the top here, this is when the Napura Chemical Company owned the paper, and then later on you actually see that Eastman logo. So now that I mentioned how Vilax papers were matte, all of these paper inventions were kind of happening all at the same time. But I'm going to talk about my favorite paper of all time, which is platinum. And there's a great book. It's called Platinum and Palladium Photographs, edited by Constance McCabe. And it's a great resource if you guys are more interested in platinum paper. It might actually be on sale on the AIC website right now. So great Christmas gift for yourself if you're interested in that. So this process was patented in 1873 by a gentleman with the name of William Willis. And Willis started the Platino type company in 1879, producing the first commercial platinum paper. As the platinum process gained in popularity in the 1880s, many other photographic paper manufacturers began producing platinum paper. By the early 1900s, a variety of surfaces and textures, paper thicknesses were available, and papers that could render more cool black tones or warm brown tones. The platinum paper process is based on the light sensitivity of iron salts. So the sensitizer is coated directly onto the paper support, and the image forms within the paper fibers, resulting in a matte surface and a relatively soft image. So before 1901, Eastman had not really had much success with platinum paper. The paper shown here is from 1901, and the sales were okay, but it was no match for a competitor like the Platino type company. One really cool thing about this platinum tin that you can see here is that it is in its original tin. So these were actually called calcium tubes. And they were made from iron sheet metal. And these tubes had a small little calcium chloride, decanter. It's kind of similar to the like silica things that we find in everything. But this just was to help keep the contents dark and dry, since platinum is very sensitive to light and humidity. We also see this image. This is from the Department of Photography here at the Eastman Museum. And it's a sample image of what the WD platinum paper would look like. By 1902, it was discovered that platinum could be used to produce nitric acid, which is necessary for making explosives, causing the cost of platinum to rise. But in 1906, Eastman actually tried to purchase the Willis and Clements company, but he was unsuccessful.
Hey, Erin.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. There was kind of a glitch. What were the tubes called?
Oh, yeah. So they were called calcium tubes. Calcium tubes.
Oh.
Do you want me to? I can start there.
No, that's fine. No, it was just that the name of the tubes. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, cool. No problem. Thank you. So again, in 1906, Eastman tried to purchase the Willis and Clements company, but he was very unsuccessful. But he did have some small success later when he purchased the Angelo Sepia platinum papers. So, the Angelo Sepia platinum paper company joined the Eastman corporate umbrella. And remember, at this time, Eastman purchased a lot of different companies that were also making faux platinum papers or papers similar to Velox. And again, faux platinum papers, there was an increase in the variety of rough surface textures offered by both the platinum and silver photographic paper manufacturers. This was even starting to happen as early as the 1890s. But these papers still continue to bring challenges to conservators and preservation specialists. Faux platinum papers have a traditional gelatin and collodion binder, but they required some modification to achieve a similar surface to platinum papers. But there is a thin varietal layer with these faux papers, causing sometimes the fibers to come through. But yeah, still presents a challenge for people to kind of identify the difference between a faux platinum paper and an actual platinum print. But so the onset of World War I in 1914 made platinum limited and really expensive. So by the middle of World War I, many photographic paper manufacturers began to discontinue platinum papers. All commercial production of platinum and palladium papers ceased by 1930 with the closing of the Platinotype Company in 1937. So again, we have all of these papers in our collection. It's a great representation, you can kind of really tell a story with even just looking up all of this information, on the boxes themselves or using our manual collection. And I just want to say thank you. Special thanks to my boss, Todd Gustafson, Kate and Nick for helping organize this, Nick Brandreth, Mark Osterman, Elizabeth Chang, who photographed a lot of these things, Lauren Lean, Sarah Evans, everyone in the Department of Photography, Martin Scott for taking some time to talk to me about some of these things. And yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Erin. I'm going to bring my video up here now. So let's get through some of these questions here. And wow, you were like right on 45 minutes. That was impressive, even with me interrupting.
I tried.
So the first question that came in was, before ASA, what was the other widely used alternative to Weston?
Oh gosh, here. Let me go back to my little timeline here. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. If you need to exit out of it's easier. I don't know.
No, we're good.
Okay.
we'll just go all the way.
All right.
If I can.
We're getting there.
There were a lot of slides, so I apologize.
Oh, I think love seeing all the visuals.
So before Weston,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm gonna really screw up the German pronunciation of this, but the Scheinengrade, it's pronounced Scheinengrade, I believe. So this was kind of the empirical system that was used, at least of what I know of. And then that was later, replaced by the Dean or Dean, I think it's pronounced Dean system. But sometimes, I mean, these were interchangeable and they were all just kind of modifications. They all kind of built off of one another. But you'll see on earlier boxes, they'll usually use, you'll see this little, here, actually, let me go to this next slide here. Or actually, no, hold on. This one might actually be better. You can see here, it's this little SCH with the degrees on there. Does that answer the question? I hope it does. That's what I know of. That was the question, right? Was it before Weston, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that answers it. And if, a lot of this stuff is a talk within itself. So, I had to kind of like talk about it to introduce this, but, this stuff is like a whole like doctorate paper,
Well, maybe at some point you can get to that.
One day.
There was a really great question that came in that I wanted to get to. Are the films and chemicals in the collections intended to be preserved so they could be used today or in the future? If yes, how is this accomplished?
So it is not, we're mostly interested in the packaging itself in the technology collection. So that's a really great question, but we preserve everything so that it's all safe. We do have boxes of film that still have the film inside, but it's not necessarily, it's preserved to keep everything stable, but it's not necessarily preserved to, so that people can use expired film. These are, museum objects we're working with. So, I think that in the future, if there was ever an interest in, scientists wanting to come in and do tests on some things, that might be something that could be considered. But right now, we're mostly interested in keeping the information on the package preserved. But with that comes, caring for whatever is inside of that. So everything is, kept at the proper climate and humidity controls, stored in proper housings that make sure that keep everything safe. I hope that answers that.
I think that you've thoroughly answered that. That's very, very good, and actually interesting to hear some of that too. Yeah. I knew that we weren't preserving them to necessarily use them, but interesting to hear the exact.
And it wouldn't be, I guess preserving it too, it wouldn't be any different from, preservation. You want to keep it, it means to preserve it, but there would be no like special step to like, oh, we're going to be using it. Like I preserve, we want to preserve everything to, to keep it around for as long as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few questions about the meters, and I think that we're probably close to the meters in your presentation here.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
We can get to those. One of them was, why was it called a bee meter?
Oh gosh, that's a really, I actually was looking to find that out. And I didn't find any like credible sources. But that's a really good question. I'll have to look into that. I'm really sorry I can't answer that. I thought about that for a little while, and there's a bunch of little like rumors like you can Google and see why it meant that, but I'd have to consult someone on that. It didn't say anything in any of like the advertisements like on why, but they did come out with different models that were like called like the queen bee, and everything that related to bee. So maybe it was just kind of, could be because it's small, and I think they wanted like the idea of it like landing anywhere and you could kind of make it fly maybe, but yeah, they had some really cool marketing for that little guy.
And then there was and maybe this was one. Was this the last meter that you showed?
The last meter that I showed was this one right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
What size is that?
Oh gosh, it's just like a disc.
Okay, so like pocket size.
Pocket size, definitely. So not as small as the bee meters, but just a little bit, pocket size. So enough to where you could put it in your pocket and, put it on the ground glass of your camera.
Right, right. And then the Vidal meter,
Mm-hmm.
was that considered an early zone system exposure system? They had said that they noticed the zone shades and wanted clarification.
It honestly, I wish I knew. This was the meter that, I was very attracted to the way that this looked. But again, it's in French. So, I did not have a chance to have any of my French friends completely interpret this for me. But the directions, maybe it could be considered that. It was just kind of hard for me to interpret the scale that they were using. And again, I mentioned this in my presentation. I would love to look into this more. This was the object that I actually found the least amount of research on, which is kind of why I wanted to include it, because I would really love any information that people have about this to kind of send it our way, so that stuff can be recorded. But this is part of our Chromer collection. So yeah, it's in French, and I translated the instructions, but they weren't super clear. I think there was probably manuals or other things that went with this that just haven't been found or interpreted yet. So,
well, luckily we did have one attendee who reached out, who is, I believe, well, they are French.
oh yeah,
I believe that they're tuning in from France, and they are interested in connecting with you, and maybe they'll be able to give you some guidance on
that would be amazing if anyone's willing to do that, because I asked a few of my friends and I did not want to bother them about that. So anyone who wants to be nerdy with me and look that up, I would be happy to connect with you.
Cool. Our dear friend Clara O'Clar had said, thank you for the great presentation. Did Eastman Kodak, the Kodak Research Laboratory, leave documentation to the museum on the provenance of what they were collecting? Names of who they bought from, prices?
For the patent collection, for the Eastman Kodak collection, so that's actually for the collection of things that were owned by Kodak for a lot of that manufacturing history. They yes and no. That's actually being worked on right now. We're hoping to get a grant for the Kodak patent collection for a lot of those manufacturing history objects. So that grant, that cataloger will actually look into that and work with the registrar department at our museum. So we're hoping we get that grant so that we can do a little bit more investigation on that, because that would be very helpful to me as well.
Let's see here. There is, I know that you've sort of already answered this. How often do you pull out a sheet and make a print?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I assume you don't pull out sheets of anything from the collection and make prints with those.
Not with the collection, but I have a very extensive paper collection of my own. So I do work with expired paper a lot. How often? I mean, now that I'm home a lot, pretty often. Like last week was probably the last time I worked with printing. I do a lot of alternative process. I do a lot of platinum printing. I shoot a lot of film. But yeah, probably last week. I'll probably do some more this weekend. But being at home a lot, it's given me a little bit more time. I have a studio here, so I'm able to work from home. So yeah.
There was a question that came in about, so the question is, are the historic photo technologies available for visitors to see during visits to the museum, and how much of the museum is open presently with the pandemic? I'll go ahead and answer that. So some of the technology objects are on view. There are display cases in our History of Photography gallery that trace different aspects of the history of the technologies. So that's on display. And then there are a few displays on the second floor of the mansion that trace I guess I would say the evolution of the technologies from the camera obscura up to the original Kodak camera. So there's quite a bit in there of daguerreotype cameras, wet plate, dry plate technologies, and kind of some of those outfits for those things. So yes, there are things on view, and the museum is presently open. We do have safety precautions in place for visits, and it would encourage everyone to, if they're interested in visiting, to check online. You can get your tickets in advance online. That way you don't have to have any money transactions when you come in. And we have mask requirements and just social distancing policies in place. And we have lower numbers that we're allowing into the museum currently, but we are open.
And Nick, just to add in that, so right now I'm actually, there's been talk, like, we're trying to figure out different ways to, like, obviously digitally engage with people. And, I know that in the technology department, we would love to be able to, if things continue the way that they are, trying to work with people digitally as much as possible. And that could be possible with objects. I actually did an interesting communication with another museum, and they actually used their camera phone to show me some objects. And I was really surprised at, like, the quality. Someone had their phone and, they had the object out and they were moving their phone around the object, and we were able to have a discussion and conversation similar to a research appointment. So we're really hoping to adapt, and make things work, since we can't see as many researchers as we would like to. Believe me, I would love to see everyone. It's my job to pull out these objects for you and talk to you all, but we're going to try to, make it work so that, we can adapt to what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah. So we are going to have to wrap up in just a minute, but we'll have time for another question or two. That just to answer one question that came in. Yes, today's program will be available on our YouTube page in the next week if you'd like to go back and visit it again. Can you give us an idea to the cost of some of these items as they were released?
I would have to look into that. I would have to look into that. If you're interested in, like, particular prices, I could definitely, I didn't focus on that for my talk. But we have record of all of that, because all of the things that I am getting my information from are manuals. I use a lot of price lists. So if there's specific things that you want to see, you can, contact the technology department and I can send you all of that information. I can't tell you right now because I don't know.
Is there a way to link package styles to a date? Someone has an old package of Kodak postcard size bromide paper, and I think they're kind of interested in how they can try and. Yes, there is.
Yeah, you can look at a lot of different things on the package. I would love to do a whole talk on reading. If that's something you guys are interested in, it'd be really cool to have a talk about, reading the paper package and what clues you can gain from that to date material. You can't get, an exact date on things, but you can definitely narrow it down to a certain date range.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into the poll.
Yeah.
Do you want to present the poll?
Yeah. So what do you guys want to learn more about? So, I didn't talk about retouching and photo finishing equipment, but that's something that I would love to talk about, in future talks. Maybe, we want to do maybe like a video series on some of this. And we have exposure meters, plates and film, paper. What do you guys want to hear more about?
This is exciting to watch. I feel like I'm watching.
I know. I feel like I'm on a game show. It's cool. It's cool. Yeah. But
so we'll let people continue to answer that, and maybe just get to one more question here. Let's see here.
I think someone did say something too about what about darkroom equipment. We do have tons of darkroom equipment as well. I didn't focus on that today, but oh, I should have added that into the poll. I'm really sorry. I think Edith said that or someone said that, but yeah, that would be, there's plenty to choose from. I will say that.
Yeah. Well, the last question that came in, will the Focus 45 presentations continue in 2021? That is, yes, to some degree they will. We will have very similar type of talks, these kind of in-depth looks into the collections. There, the kind of behind the scenes stuff going on. We will absolutely be continuing to do talks like that. We're just not too sure exactly what capacity those will be happening in, but they will for sure be happening. I can promise you that. So just keep an eye out on our website. You'll be able to find all of the programming that we're doing online, or hopefully in person at some point again. But when we do switch to in person, we'll try and have it both be in person and live streamed. So folks who aren't able to make it to Rochester are able to participate and watch along. So I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions. There were many that came in, and we have hit our time limit here today. Erin, if anyone is interested in connecting with you or the technology department, what is the best way to do that?
So just email. So through our site, there's a way to, I think through the Eastman Museum website, there's a way to directly get a hold of the technology collection. All of those emails get forwarded to me. So please reach out. I would love to hear from all of you, especially during this time. Always, if I don't answer right away, it's because I'm answering someone else's question, but I will get to you. That's probably my favorite thing to do is hear, oh gosh, this poll is, oh, hold on. I'm trying to see how many people what they want to see. Oh, it's kind of like neck and neck.
Films are
yeah, but yeah, I think that, I do my best to answer all of the emails, and I love getting a hold of people, and it's all about, it's my job to, give everyone access to all of this information, and that's super important to me. So yeah, please get a hold of me.
Okay, yeah, so if you go through our website, you can access the technology collection through our website when you kind of hover over collections, and then there will be an email address in there. So Erin, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Really greatly appreciate it. Thank you everybody for attending, for submitting really great questions, and participating in our poll. So we'll take the results of the poll, and we will implement those at some point in the not so distant future, and maybe we'll take a deeper dive into some of these other things. So thanks everybody. Hope you all have a good, wonderful rest of your week, and hope to see you all at our next program.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.